How's it going, folks? John from Harcus Audio and DIY Punk Rock here. A little while ago I done a little video playthrough of me using the Blasting Room kit that I bought from Room Sound. Thought it was awesome and I uploaded the video to my YouTube page. A lot of folk were digging it and wanting to know how to process the drums and the full mix. Received a few emails about asking how to process the guitars and bass as well, so I thought, I'll just put together a whole mixing tutorial from start to finish on how I achieved that sound using the Blasting Room Signature Series kit. I'm working in Pro Tools with a whole bunch of different plugins here. I've got quite a bit of this Slate bundle involved, a few Brainworks plugins, some stuff by FabFilter including Pro Q, Saturn, their limiter, Pro L2 is my go-to limiter, as well as some stock Pro Tools Verbs, Slate Trigger 2 as a gate, a transient shaper that's in the Slate bundle, one instance of a metric halo channel strip that wouldn't be essential, and a few other bits and pieces, but I'll go through everything as we go and you can check it out. I thought first of all I'd just play the mix from the start to end. The track's only a minute long, so you can hear what it was like with the mastering chain on, and then I can strip it all back, go through kick, snare, all the way up to the drum bus processing, to what guitar plugins I'm using, bass, and then what master bus processing I'm doing and why. So without further ado, this is the track. Cool, so yeah, it was just a little demo to try out the Blasting Room kit, which was digging, loving the sound of the kick drum, the rooms, the snare drum, all the bits and pieces. Great songwriting tool, and you can definitely get pretty sweet mixes with it as well. So yeah, let's get right into it. I think the best thing to do would be to have a look at the processing of the drums, but first of all, how it's set up in Contact. Cool, so probably the best bet is just to switch off the master bus processing, so you get the processing on each channel first and then we can look at this at the end. What I will do though is I'm going to keep on Slate FGX as I'll be using it as a limiter, so I don't have any overs when I'm recording this back into my computer. Just a quick overview of what this is. It's a clipper or a limiter. I use this in basically clipping mode, and I use a limiter after it to get more volume out the track. I've got some pretty basic settings on this. You'll see that the gain knob is just over 2 and the detail is around about 2 as well. I've got this constant gain monitoring in, which basically keeps the track at the same level while you adjust the settings so you can hear what it's doing. I use this solely to clip my mix, basically to shave off some of the transients, the snare drum, the kick drum and the toms, which are usually the loudest things in my mix, before hitting my limiter, which makes the limiter's job a lot easier to get it louder. So this ITP slider is up at around 7. Which basically is clipping mode up here, or when it's down smooth it's more of a limiter, and the dynamic perception knob. I usually always have this on all my mixes around about 2, and I find it makes your mixes just sound wider, brings the guitars up a bit. So I'm going to keep that on, and I'll show you the difference of it in context later on. So with Contact, I've got the Blasting Room kit loaded in. It is the standard setting called Blasting Room Signature Series drums. You can select it under instruments, and it's this first preset here, and it loads it up exactly how I've got it. I think the only thing I've got different is this cymbal here is a Swiss Classic 18. I think the default one's got the opposite of this German shimmer. In the mixer as well, it's pretty much stock settings across the board. I checked it against the original preset. The only thing is I have my rooms 1 to 5 slightly different, so if you did want to take note of them, everything's exactly the same apart from rooms. Room 1 at 17.2, negative 17.2, room 2 is at negative 19.5, room 3 is at negative 16.3, room 4 is at negative 18.6, and the room 5 is at negative 22.3. To be honest, probably doesn't really matter. It's just the way I've been mixing, kept the rooms slightly down a bit. I think they're 2 dB lower than the actual preset itself, so it's not a massive fuss if you're trying to copy this. But you could probably get pretty damn close just leaving it as it is. So in Contact you can route all your individual kit pieces out to auxiliary channels, which I've got here. So these are all aux channels in Pro Tools. I've got kick, snare, rack, floor 1, floor 2, hats, overhead, room close and room far. I'll not go into a tutorial about how to exactly do this. There's plenty online of how to send out audio from Contact to your DAW, and obviously all DAWs will be completely different. But basically I've got this set up to mirror this. So I've got 9 auxes, I think. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Kick, snare, rack, floor 1, floor 2, hats, overhead, room close, room far. So I've got kick and kick sub, channel out kick, snare top, snare bottom, channel out snare, side and bottom. Rack toms on rack 1, floor toms on floor 1, floor tom 2s on floor 2. Hats is on its hats channel, but ride and overheads are both in the overheads. You'll see on that overhead channel I've potentially brought the kick and snare back a tiny bit, minus 7.1 and minus 5.6. Toms in the room 1 are down to 16.8, and that would be the same across the board. And all these room channels are across 2 separate auxes, so room 1, room 2 are on room close, and then 3, 4 and 5 are on room far. So basically that's sending each piece of the kit out to Pro Tools to mix. Cool, so let's start with the kick drum. Okay, so let's get on to the drums. Just a little quick bit about the routing. Kick, snare, rack, floor, floor 2, hats, overhead, room close and room far are all going to this drum bus, of which I will have a compressor and EQ on. For the sake of this tutorial, I'm going to bypass that just now. And then I'll also go into the sends of what's been sent out to some parallel processing, some snare verb, a snare slam channel. Pan wise, pretty much everything's on stereo auxes, but I have moved some of these just so they're placed more where I wanted them. Totally up to yourself. Have a look at that. With the room close mics though, I've just panned to mono. Cool, so first things first, kick drum is coming through the kick channel. We'll just select a bit of audio and I'll just put it on loop and you can have a listen. So my first piece of processing was simply to get a little bit more top end in it, a little bit more bottom around 100 Hz using Pro Q3. And a slight dip here at 4K. Pretty straightforward stuff. I then used this metric halo channel strip. First of all, it was just to add some compression. I'll bypass it just now and let you see what it's doing. I've also got a small EQ curve here as well, adding some more top end. Up at around about 5.92K at 2 dB, 3 dB. and a little bit of mid boost. This compressor here is basically just giving us a little bit more punch. Attack at 17, release at 122. So generally you can just hear it's getting brighter. I then add Slate Trigger 2, which I'm not using for samples, I'm just using for a gate. So when you put that on, you can detect the transient due to the line, and if you pull this mix knob right back and then hit gate on, it then turns into a gate, which is really effective at cleaning up sounds. I felt this kick drum in particular just had too much of a tail for the track, so I basically just gated it. On, off. Just a tighter sound. And then on another EQ, where I'm dipping out a little bit of the 160, 397, 219 and 3.4. And that was the kick sound I settled for. Here's it off. And on. This kick drum is getting sent to a parallel compressor channel over here. I'm going to unmute this. As you can see, it's been sent at unity gain at 0, pre-fader. This is the channel here. And I'm going to basically show you what that's doing. So at the minute it's just adding volume. I've then added an 1176 style compressor, a slow attack fast release. As you can hear, it's just giving it a little bit extra sustain, a little bit extra punch. And then just to tame the transient slightly, I've added Waves L2 limiter. And that is what that channel is doing on its own. And blended with the original signal. Just adds a little slight bit more punch. Cool, moving on to the snare drum. So to start off on the snare, I've added some 1176 compression. This is the Blue Stripe Slate one. It's got a little bit of distortion in it, which I quite like, and makes the tail a bit longer. Looks like a complex EQ, but I've just been messing about with a little bit of the bands here. Technically, we're just dipping out at 283 here. Basically just trying to pull out a little bit of mid-range and add a bit of sparkle. Then I'm on to Slate Trigger 2 again, using it as the gate. Again, mix knob right back, the gate on. You can hear it tightens it right up. This is a transient shaper that's in the Slate bundle. So I've slammed that on and just pushed the attack up by 17% to give it some crack. You can hear how that's affecting the transient. With that, I'm dipping out some more low end where the thump of the snare is, and a little bit of mid range at 487, very small top end boost. As you can hear, in general, everything's just getting slightly more scooped out, kind of more hi-fi sounding. Then I wanted even more snap, so I stuck on this FG401 with slow attack fast release. And finally Pro MB, which is a multi-band compressor, just focusing on the low end of the snare. Just at some points I felt it was just a bit overbearing, so instead of just sucking it out with an EQ, I'll just leave the multi-band on. Cool. So that's the kick and snare without the parallel processing. I'd just like to hear the snare without that processing and before and after. So just snappier in general. I've then sent the snare drum to the same parallel processor over here. Again, unity gain pre. And you can hear it's just adding sustain, smashing into that compressor. Kind of bringing back some of the sustain from the gate that kind of cut it off. With my snare as well, I've got a few other sends here, so I'll just go through them quickly. First of all, I wanted a little bit of a reverb, so I've set up a aux send to a reverb channel over here. All these auxiliary channels are just going straight out to the master fader, and the drum bus is going out to the master fader. So Deverb, it's a stock Pro Tools plugin for reverb. I've got it set to room 1, small, a decay 166 milliseconds and a pre-delay of 7 milliseconds. And as you can hear, it's just adding some nice length to it. So that's the reverb. I added a little EQ at the end of it to dip out some of the low end. Cool. And then I really like doing this. This is a snare room channel, which I'm using a separate sample. Totally not essential, but it does kind of fill out the sound of the snare that I was looking for. So I've set up a auxiliary send called snare room. It is sending all the way over here to snare room sample, and it has an instance of trigger 2 on it. And in trigger 2, I'm using this 4 samples now. So that the sample I've chosen is called Near Room Snare D. It's out of one of the Get Good Drums packs, and you can hear it's got a cool room sound. So I've blended that in just to give a bit of depth to the snare. I do like the sounds of the rooms in the blasting room, but it's just something I'm totally used to using is this particular sample. And as you can see, the send from the snare is being sent into trigger 2. Trigger 2 is seeing the transient and it's triggering this sample instead of the snare drum. And then on top of that sample, I've added a small EQ, just dipping out this kind of honky 400 thing here. And a little bit of this 600. And added a little bit of top end. So that's that snare processing, and finally I just wanted another parallel channel, parallel compressor for the snare drum, just so I could control ultimately the final kind of snap of it. So this one I've just called Snare Slam, and I've sent this on an aux send pre-fader over a snare slam, so it's just a duplicate of the snare, and then I put another compressor on it. So what we got here, so yeah, the FG401 slow attack fast release. I'll let you hear what that's doing. I'll bring the fader right up. So yeah, it's not loud at all. It's kind of buried underneath the snare drum, but it's a nice thing to be able to automate if you just wanted a bit more punch in the snare. If it came to a section you wanted louder, bring that fader up. Okay, cool. So at this point I'd probably head to the drum bus because I've got the two loudest parts of my kit kind of playing, and I'll stick on my drum bus compressor and leave it at that just now. This is doing some very light compression. It's the Slate digital clone of their SSL style compressor, FG Grey. And I've got it set at a pretty fast attack, 10 milliseconds, fast release, and I'm just doing a dB gain reduction. I've got this high pass filter set at 57 Hz, so basically it is not triggering off all the sub of the kick and just anything above 57 Hz. Cool. Moving on to, I'll probably go for overheads next. Let me just unmute these and we'll just focus on how it sounds. So some pretty straightforward processing here, just one EQ. So as you can hear, I'm just kind of using a low cut all the way up to 470 Hz to get rid of basically the thump of the kick and the snare, to focus on the top end of the cymbals, and giving it a significant boost. So around about here of 5 dB, 2 Hz, 2400 Hz, a little bit of 8K. Hats. Just pushing a little bit of 974 and dipping a bit at the top end. Room close. So again, I've used a low cut here and just pulled out a little bit of 333. And in our second EQ, went a little bit further, dragging a bit more mid-range out. And I've taken out a little bit of this 5.4, it must have been a ringy. There it is. And a little boost at 9000. Cool, room far. Quite like the sound of this, so I just kind of took a little bit of low end at the bottom of it, at 70 Hz. And a little bit of mid-range at 6 to 8. A little boost at 4.5. So all of them together. Stick these auxes back on and the kick and snare. Cool, let's find a part with toms. So first of all, that rack tom, just dragging out a little bit of low end at 108.03, quite a wide band, and then a little boost at 4.3. And then I've used trigger also as a gate just to kind of defeat some of the sustain. As you can hear, it's made it much shorter, but I just like the punchiness of toms when they're just like abrupt. And then on top of that, again, the VCA compressor from Slate. giving it a little bit of a attack. Cool, and I'm pretty sure all the toms here are set to a similar kind of EQ. Maybe not. Cool, so tom 2. I'm taking out a bit of that 200. A little mid dip at 383. A little bit of top end boost. Again, trigger. And the compressor. And finally, this floor, felt it needed a little bit of a mid boost. Trigger has a gate. And that compressor's barely doing anything. And then finally I felt it just needed a little extra bit of 2.7. And then finally these toms also are all getting sent to this parallel channel over here, so it just gives it a bit more sustain. And the overheads also. Cool, I'm just going to go back to the start and play it back. I've got one final EQ that's on the drum bus. And all you can see here I'm doing is just shaping it. Pulling out a little bit of the harshness there. Cool. So that's the kind of processing I've got so far on the drums, the drum bus. Just so you know, obviously I've got Slate FGX on the Mixbus there, and usually by the end of it I'm aiming for this with all the instruments to be hitting around about -12. So at the moment currently the drums are at -14, which are -15 even, that are going to be the loudest part. By the time I've got the guitars and bass in, it be anywhere between -12, -10. But we'll keep an eye on that. Basically what it's doing just now will just be clipping off any transients that go over a certain threshold. So that is how the drums sound with parallel processing, snare verb and drum bus. So you can use that as a reference of how that sounds in solo. We'll move on to the bass guitar. Alright, let's have a look at the bass guitar. Just a DI track, straight in the Mori interface at the time. It's a pretty cool bass. It's made by a company called Cort. It's nice and twangy, kind of tone I like from a DI. But we'll just have a listen to the Queen signal first, then we'll have a look at the processing. Should be fairly quick, I'll talk through it. It's just one single channel, and the routing is just going directly again out to the master fader. This is how the DI sounds. Cool. So let's just select this piece here. First of all, just to level out the DI, I wanted to add a little bit of compression before I go into an amp sim, which will be second in the chain. You could use any compressor for this, but I like to use this. It's by Sound Toys. It's called the Devil Lock. Basically, it absolutely destroys audio, so you've got to be careful with it. But kind of stock settings here, it's got a crunch mode. Crunch gives a lot more distortion, crushes the compression. I've got a slow release on it, and darkness knobs at 0 and mix knobs at 7, but I'm just going to stick that on and let you hear the difference. So as you can hear, it's making it sound fuller, a little bit more level in sound through the compression. Next up, I absolutely love this for bass. It's by Brainworks. It's called Bass Dude Amp, and I always usually just use it on the stock settings as soon as I open it. It's got kind of this nice distortion to it, and the stock cabinet impulse response on it, I just use the first one. It sounds great, so I'm just going to let you hear that on and off. Just gives it a really nice high mid-range kind of twang, punky sounding bass. Next thing, I just went in with an EQ just to kind of sort out this frequency at 3745 Hz. I'll just let you hear what that's doing. So that's just working on the pick attack of the bass. Next, just to level it out even more, I like to use Waves L2. I usually kind of slam bass guitars into this thing. It doesn't really affect them overly that much, but it really levels things out. And it's also really good on vocals for leveling out any inconsistencies. So I've pulled this down. It's got a threshold of negative 11.14, and the out ceiling's negative 11.14 as well. I'll just let you hear it on and off. So with that, obviously there's a lot more compression added now. I'm just going to have a look at kind of cleaning up the bass tone, adding some distortion, then cleaning up any kind of excess frequencies that the distortion's created. So my next step would be to add this EQ, where I'm going to be trying to clean up the mid-range, scooping out the bass a bit to leave more room for the guitars. So first of all, I've got this low cut up to 45 Hz, and then quite a big dip of 6 dB down here, just starting around 190, going all the way up to 1900. You can see I've done kind of 2 bells there, but technically I'm just kind of scooping out some mid-range and looking at some high frequencies. We'll solo them and have a listen to what this is doing. So you can hear it's just kind of cleaning up that mid-range. Although the bass has some distortion on it already, this is a kind of trick that I learnt from watching a few videos with Nolly, that was the bassist in Periphery, who's now, well, he's just an amazing mixer and producer. But this is technically similar when you watch videos of guys who like split up their bass DI signal to focus on like the low end, and then have a mid-range channel, and then have a high mid-range channel, and then top end. But I just kind of like to keep it dead simple, and this plugin allows you to do that. So Saturn is a distortion plugin in its simplest form, but it's multi-band, so it lets you choose I can't remember how many bands, but in this instance I've got it split up into 3. So I've got, this is the low end here. So basically I'm trying to focus anything above 416 Hz to 3514. I'm splitting up these bands. So 3 bands, and for each band you can choose an algorithm, which is a distortion type. So I always do this. I open it up, I'll split it into 3 bands. I always leave the top and bottom bands, which are by default warm tape, but this middle band, which has a crossover between 416 and 3514, I changed to this heavy saturation. I'm going to put this plugin on and off, and then I'm going to turn down the heavy saturation and let you hear what it's doing. So as you can hear there, the mid band's distorting, but it's keeping the bottom and top clean. This is the bottom end. Then the distorted mid channel. Then the top end clean. Super useful for keeping your bottom end clean and giving distortion in the mid range. I'll just turn that knob down as well so you can hear it coming in and out. So that's a super cool plugin, and just kind of levels off the mid-range pick attack of the bass as well. After that, loading up this kind of clean-up EQ. Seems like pretty messy, to be honest. I would have just been messing around with some bands just to kind of clean up, but I've got a small boost at 62, a small boost at 121, and then again I'm cutting out more mids between 120 and 1200. There'll be a frequency here that I'm just notching out, and then basically a high cut just to stop any of the harmonics coming through above 8,000. So let's have a listen to that in and out. And you can hear it really dealing with the honkiness around here. But it's a super nice sound. It cuts through the mix really well when you've got distortion in the mid-range. And this, as I said, this high cut up here is just dealing with any fizz that distortion's created. And then finally, just a light bit of compression to kind of round off the tone, bring back a bit of attack, so it's a slow attack, fast release. And a before and after. And then I'll drop it into the mix. Super cool bass sound, pretty easy to do. Essentially you wouldn't need all of those plugins in that exact order or chain, but yeah, if you find something you like and experiment with distorting the mid-range of the bass, I highly recommend Saturn to do that. Check it out, pretty sure FabFilter have a free trial. Cool, let's move on to some guitars. Cool, so final piece of the puzzle are the guitars, and then we'll look at the Mixbus processing and just how to get it up to a kind of competitive level. So first of all, super simple track. Got two guitars, one panned full left, one panned full right. DI is the same as the bass. I'll let you hear this section of the DIs, just with no processings. Cool, so pretty straightforward DI signal. In this instance, I used THU Slate, as it's included in the Slate digital bundle. I use a lot of different amp sims, as well as I'm lucky I've just recently bought the Fractal Audio XFX 3, which is awesome. But yeah, for this track I chose to use THU Slate. So the guitar pan full left and the guitar pan full right are exact copies, so I'll show you the processing for guitar left and then the bus processing. So guitar left and guitar right are being sent to this guitar bus and then out to the master fader. So first of all, THU Slate, it's like a light version of the full version of THU. And for this guitar I chose to use a tube screamer with the drive all the way down, tone in the middle at 5 and the level at 4.72, and then this Marcus 2 lead, which I would imagine is a Mesa Mark II C Plus or something of the sort. I'll go through the settings because you can obviously copy this if I just go through this slowly. So the lead British mod is on, volume's at 8.28, bass is at 0.307, this treble shift is off, middle's at 3.24, treble's 6.92, bass shift on, lead drive all the way up at 10, lead master's at 6.08, levels at -7.1, deep is on, presence 4.84. And then the cab is, if you go to properties, you can check what the cab is, but this is one of the own hammer built-in IRs that come with it as well, in the Slate cabinet IR. So it's the OH412 orange M25 OH104 with the low pass filter button on. And then there's a 7-band EQ pedal that I've got engaged that's like dipping out a whole heap of mids. I'll show you the difference in a minute, but we'll go through the settings first. 0, -3, -7.9, -7.5, -3.8, 0, 0, and then this level is up at 6.6, and then there's a parametric EQ at the end of it. I think this was based on one of these presets and then I just tweaked it a bit, but gain at 0, frequency 122, Q at 1.09, and this high pass filter button's on, and then EQ2, 0, 1 kilohertz, Q of 1, and high shelf, and the level's at 0. Anyway, I'll let you hear the difference with that on and off, and I'll just quickly buzz through the buttons as well. So guitar left, pan at mono, so tube screamer's just giving it more drive into the amp. It just felt better as well when I was playing my pan mutes. This graphic EQ is doing a whole lot, almost like the V shape of a Mesa head. It's EQ. It's got all those super honky low mids out of there. And this isn't doing a whole lot. Anyway, I have an instance of Pro Q on here doing some mad funky EQ. Again, this would just be me pushing up bands to see what I liked and what I didn't. I could easily smooth the shape out in one band, and I probably should have, but you know, I'm just leaving it as it was when I opened it. So let's engage it and see what it's doing. So cutting out more mids, low mids here. This honky stuff around about 351, 445, 613 is usually a culprit. Yeah, so just trying to tame the low mids here in this guitar. And then this will be a spiky at 3442. So just a small cleanup of the guitar. There's nothing over 3 dB there, so it's just really small moves. And then I always like to level out my distorted guitars with L2, like I did with the bass. That kind of helps keep pan mutes in check. I know a lot of people use a multi-band compressor for that, but I just like to use a limiter, and it kind of keeps guitars at bay. So that's the channel, that's the processing in THU. I'm going to pan it left again and bring in another guitar. This is an exact copy of the settings, so you can copy and paste over, pan left and right, and then you get this. Cool. So after the fact, I've got these guitar left and guitar right sent to a guitar bus. So I've got another instance of L2 limiter here just to level out the guitars when they're in stereo as a pair. Let's open up that. And it's literally doing probably less than a dB of gain reduction. I also like to use virtual tape machines from Slate on my guitars. It seems to thicken up the tone, add some harmonics, and just really kind of thickens things up. Let me show you an A-B between that. Basically, I've got, I think it's default settings, but the speed's at 30 IPS. It's on 1/2 inch 2-track and the FG9, and I'll just bypass that. You can hear it's giving a nice thickness to the tone. And then finally, just a kind of EQ to clean everything up. A small dip at 175 here, 974, a little boost. This probably would have been done in the mix just to give a bit more kind of, I don't know, high mid bite. And this frequency would be a dip. Let's put it on. In turn, what this is doing is it's just scooping out the tone, bypassed. And that's it for guitars. I'm just looking for a kind of, I try to get a smooth top end, make sure the low mids aren't too kind of, I don't know, like honky, like in here. A lot of the times you can listen to guitar tones and think they sound absolutely awesome through your speakers when you're listening to them in solo, and then you stick them in a mix and they just absolutely destroy the drums and everything. So sometimes guitars have to sound a little bit shite in solo to sound good in a mix. So yeah, it's always worth having this in context. Obviously, I'm letting you hear it all in solo, but it has been mixed in context, but I just want to let you hear it, how it sounds in solo. I'll stick them into the mix now. Cool guys, so that's the drums, the bass and the guitars kind of sitting quite nicely together in the mix. The final piece for me would be to add some Mixbus Processing on the master fader. Likely when I mix this, I usually work kind of in a top-down fashion where I'd have my compressor on anyway, and obviously the FGX would be put on at some point near the start of the chain, and most likely than not I usually mix into the limiter as well, just to hear how the snare drum is sounding when it's kind of up to level, because limiters can tend to shave off quite a lot of transient when you really slam into them, so sometimes it's a good idea to have it on. Just depends on your mixing style, if you like the sound of it while you do it. But I do a lot of mixing and mastering for bands, so I like to kind of hear how the track's going to sound finished. So I'll have that on. But for the sake of this tutorial, we've kept it kind of off, apart from the FGX, which was just stopping any overs. So first of all, let's just remind ourselves what we're listening to. So I always like to have a kind of SSL style compressor on my Mixbus. They tend to kind of bring the sides up a little bit, add a little bit of punch to the track. This one in particular adds a little bit of colour, a little bit of mid-range, which I quite like. It's the FG Grey by Slate. And fairly typical settings on this. I've got the attack at 10, super fast release at 0.1, threshold at 0 because I'm coming in pretty hot. A ratio of 2, and then this high pass filter, I usually kind of play about with it, but basically what I'm looking to do is this filters out anything before the compressor under this frequency 62. So say there's loads of sub in the kick, it'll only start compressing anything 62 Hz and above, so it kind of helps kind of grab the snare transients more than the kick. So I've got that engaged, but in this instance I've got the mix knob right down at 27, so it was more of a parallel kind of thing I was just playing about with. So I'm going to stick it on and see if you can hear the difference. So that's super subtle because of the mix knob being down at 27. So after that, in this session I was probably just playing about with a little bit of EQ, listening for any whistling frequencies that I could kind of defeat just on a Mixbus EQ. Nothing drastic at all here. I mean, that's negative 1.5 dB, very small moves. I'll stick that on and let's have a listen to what frequencies I've killed. So really just some of the kind of nasally stuff that's coming through in the guitars. But it just kind of rounds that off a little bit. Next in line I've got a multi-band compressor. This is just, again, just doing something very light here. I've got them split up into 3 bands, low band, then a kind of low mids band and a high band. Could probably get away with not having this on at all, but I think it was more so probably, just double check, but to just tame the kick drum. So yeah, that's just kind of keeping the low end in check, 62 Hz. Crossovers 24 dB per octave, and yeah, I've just got this default settings on FabFilter Pro MB, and I will just be kind of keeping that low end in check. This is twitching away just now and again, so it's probably just tackling any kind of snare overs, but yeah, I'll put it on and off. Kind of gives the track a little bit of movement. Then after that, because these are like super light compressors, I've got something just doing another 1 dB. I just absolutely love the punch that this thing gives. This is the Brainworks Plugin Alliance Shadow Hills compressor, and it's got an optical compressor on it and a VCA, and I'm just using the optical one, but Sounds super cool. You can go way too far with it. I'll show you that in a second. But yeah, I'll just stick it on. All I've done here is I'm just playing with this optical threshold to see if I can find a kind of movement that I like the sound of in the track. Let's go to the extreme. And back. So yeah, half a dB. And then I have one final EQ here. Now, this will literally be a very small high shelf because I will be referencing against the track. I love to reference against some of my favourite mixes while I'm mixing, and I use a couple of tools to do that. This is the old tool I used to use called Magic AB. There's a brand new one called Metric AB. It's by, I think it's Adapter, but it comes in the Plug-in Alliance bundle, or you can pick up there. But yeah, so basically I would have been referencing against a Good Riddance track. This is it here, so like you can basically load in a track and then level match your songs. I'll show you that in a second. But yeah, all I've done here is added a very small high shelf just to brighten up the track, the whole track, by literally 0.28, nothing more. This isn't doing anything. And then we're back into Slate FGX. As I mentioned before, we'd be aiming between something between -12 RMS and in between -12 and -10, which it is. I'm going to put this off and on now and show you what it's actually doing. You'll probably hear the guitars don't sound quite as wide. There might be slightly more transient in the snare. But yeah, just have a listen and see what you reckon. Cool, so let me show you exactly what that's doing. My next and final plugin in the chain is my limiter, which I can use to bring the track up to whatever LUFS, LUFS, RMS I want. I use Pro L2 by FabFilter. I love it. I think it sounds great. It's super clean, and you can play about with the attack and release knobs on it to kind of get a kind of movement that you like. Nothing really too fancy going on here. I'm using the modern style. Look ahead's at the default value. I've got oversampling on too. I've pulled this attack button down to around about 39. You can pull it to 0, but it really starts crushing the snare drums. I'll show you that just in a second. Then release at 107 milliseconds. Pretty sure these are standard settings with the default when you load it. And my output currently is at -0.9 true peak, or -1. So I'm going to switch that on. The track's going to get a little bit louder, so bear that in mind. Here we go. Just quickly show you what this attack knob does. That's really pushing that snare down now. And then you can open it up and let it through a bit. So the reason I'm using FGX before the limiter was to get more volume out the limiter. Let me just open both at once and show you exactly what's going on there. If I take FGX off, which is clipping my mix, the limiter will have a harder time limiting it. So let me show you. If you keep an eye on this gain meter while I push this off and on. So bypassed. So yeah, super handy thing to have to get more volume out of your tracks. Clip it a little bit. There's loads of clippers out there. I think JST have one. Slate, as I said, I'm using that ITP slider. This knob here is clipping mode. Dynamic perception, pushing the sides out a little bit. Yeah, and that's about it. I'll just double check this now. I'll show you what I was on about Magic AB, and the other one that you can get is called Metric AB. But if I just play the track, and I've got, for instance, this track here by Good Riddance, I'll not be able to play much of it, otherwise we'll probably get some sort of mad copyright strike. But yeah, I'll just AB very quickly, and you can hear the difference between my mix and that mix. Here we go. So. Yeah, so that's how I use it. I use it to judge low end, judge my mid, judge my high end, and I always like using references just to kind of keep my ears tuned to what sounds good and what doesn't. I mean, that track's got its differences. The aim really isn't to make it sound exactly the same, but just to guide you and knowing if you maybe are like got far too much mid-range in the genre or whatever. But you know, there's so many different mixes out there that, you know, there's no right way, there's no right or wrong way. This is just how I like to do it. For instance, if you were to try, you could easily copy the drum sound here, but your guitar DIs might sound vastly different from mine, so therefore that amp sim processing, etc., isn't going to sound the same, or your bass isn't the same bass as mine. So, you know, you could, to a certain extent, get a similar tone and vibe, but, you know, all these things are all variants that will dictate the sound at the end of the day. So, yeah, that's it. So, here we go. That's the whole mix from start to finish. I hope it was informative. You can ask away any questions in the comments if you have any questions to ask. I'm quite happy to jump in and answer them when I get time to do so. And yeah, that's about it. So hopefully it's pretty straightforward and not too long and boring. I know these things can be taxing when you're just watching somebody talk about some numbers on an EQ graph, but yeah, I've enjoyed doing it, and hopefully I'll do some more in the future with live drums and other drum machine VSTs like Get Good Drums or Easy Drummer or anything. Just let me know and I'll try my best to get some stuff up. But yeah, like I said, it's probably not the best mix in the world, but yeah, nice to see the process, and hopefully you found it useful. Anyway, nice one. Thanks for watching.